What's up guys, welcome back to the channel, and today I'm back with another video. This time we're doing another top 10 list, looking at the top 10 point guards currently in the NBA. And for these top 10 lists, they're always very controversial, but I think I did a pretty good job of narrowing it down to the 10 best point guards in the NBA this year. And for this specific list, I'm going to be looking at these 10 point guards as individuals and how great they are as individual players. And I'm going to look at their whole 2021 resume, how they played in the playoffs, if they made the playoffs, how much they affected winning, and just how great they were as individuals. That is the most important thing for this list. So with that being said, let's not waste any time, and let's get into the top 10 point guards for the 2021 season. So first up on our list, we have Ja Morant, the 2020 Rookie of the Year winner. And Ja is easily one of the most exciting high-flying players in the NBA, whether he's making dunks or missing dunks, it doesn't matter. He is must-see TV every single night. And this year, Ja had very similar numbers to his rookie year, averaging 19.1 points per game, 7.4 assists, 4.0 boards on 45, 30, and 73 splits. And Memphis once again made the playoffs with a 38-34 record. And due to Ja's stats not taking a drastic jump, that led a lot of NBA fans to say he was overrated or even overhyped. Now me myself, I never bought into that. I think that playing tournament versus the Warriors, we saw why he was a top 10 point guard. As in this game, he had 35 points, 5 threes on 48% shooting. And in the fourth quarter and overtime, he had 15 points, outdueling superstar Steph Curry. And that was a big time game for Ja. It was essentially a game 7, and he showed up big time for that Grizzlies team. Now looking how he played in the playoffs versus the Utah Jazz, once again he was great, averaging 30.2 points per game, 8.2 assists, 4.8 boards on 49, 32, and 78 splits. And in Game 2, hit a 47-point explosion, which is the most points in Memphis playoff history. And also in this game, he became the second youngest player ever to have 45 points in the playoffs. So taking all this into account, I think Ja this year has earned the right as a top 10 point guard, and I ranked him at the number 10 spot. Now looking at number 9, we have the veteran Jrue Holiday. And Holiday this year is in his first year in Milwaukee in his 11th season at 30 years old. And Jrue this year has been extremely impactful on both ends, not only scoring the ball, but also defending at an elite level. And he was a much needed upgrade from Eric Bledsoe, one of the worst starting point guards in the NBA. And this year Holiday averaged 17.7 points per game, 6.1 assists, 4.5 boards on 50, 39, and 79 splits, and he made first team all defense. And in my personal opinion, Jrue is the best perimeter defender in the NBA out of any guard. And the first round versus the Heat, you saw why he was first team all defense, as he held Jimmy Butler to 29% shooting and Tyler Hero to 31% shooting. And those two players specifically killed the Bucks last year in the playoffs when they had Eric Bledsoe instead of Jrue Holiday. Now also the big time moment for Jrue Holiday in the playoffs comes in Game 7 versus Brooklyn, as he had an awful shooting night, but when it mattered most, he had his own personal 7-point run, which saved the Bucks' season. And throughout the entire game, he played great defense on Kevin Durant as well as James Harden. And looking at his playoff numbers in total up to this point, he's averaging 17.1 points per game, 7.7 assists, 5.5 boards on 43, 30, and 65 splits. But even looking past the numbers, what puts Jrue Holiday in my top 10 is his defensive impact for this Bucks team. On any given night, he can guard 1 through 4, and he can effectively lock those players down, or at least bother them so much they have a very off shooting night. So taking into account Jrue Holiday's impact on the defensive end, I think right now he's the 9th best point guard in the NBA. Now looking at number 8, we have De'Aaron Fox, the 23-year-old point guard for the Sacramento Kings. And De'Aaron, in my opinion, is the most underrated player in the NBA, as he is never talked about, and he plays for the lonely Sacramento Kings. And very few fans actually know how good he is, and this year, he quietly averaged 25.2 points per game, 7.2 assists, 3.5 boards on 48, 32, and 72 splits. And when he played, Sacramento had a 24-34 record. And looking at Fox's first 4 years in the NBA, every single year, he has increased his scoring average as well as his efficiency. And this year in 2021, he averaged a career high 25.2 points per game, he had 44 points in a game, the most ever in his career, and he had 103 threes, which is also a career high. And looking at his ranks versus the entire NBA, he was 15th in scoring, 11th in steals, and 9th in assists. One of only 5 players in the NBA top 15 in all those categories. So to put it very simply, De'Aaron Fox, he needs more recognition, and he needs to get out of Sacramento to get his proper respect. But even with that being said, I recognize De'Aaron Fox as a top 10 point guard in the NBA at the number 8 spot. Now looking at number 7, we have another young point guard, that being Trae Young. And Trae this year, surprisingly, was not an all-star after he was in 2020. And that's in large part due to his stats not really improving, but his team overall had a much better record, going 41-31 this year. And after firing Lloyd Pierce, they went 27-11, the best record during that stretch. And I think Trae's stats overall can be pretty deceiving, as his numbers went down, but as an overall basketball player's understanding of the game, he got much better, specifically in the playoffs. He's averaging 29.4 points per game, 9.9 assists, 2.9 boards on 42, 32, and 87 splits. Definitely some big time numbers for a player in their first ever playoff appearance. And there have been 5 key games in the playoffs for Trae Young where he's really showed out. That was in Game 1 versus the Knicks. He had 32 points, 10 assists, 7 boards, and a game-winning floater. Game 5 in New York, the closeout game, he had 36 points, 9 assists, 4 boards, and the ice-cold dagger 3. In Game 1 versus Philly, he had 35 points, 10 assists, on 48% shooting, and a shocking Game 1 upset. In Game 5, once again, he had 39 points, 7 assists, 3 steals, and a 26-point comeback effort. And in Game 1 versus Milwaukee, he went off for 48 points, 11 assists, and 7 boards in a big-time Game 1 victory. And when looking at Trae specifically, he's been great in the playoffs so far, but I think looking at the guys ahead of him, they are more established, and I think there's still another level he has to go up to achieve that top 5 point guard status. And right now you could really argue he is top 5, but for my list, I have him at the number 7 spot. Now looking at number 6, we have Russell Westbrook. And this year Westbrook was in his first year for the Washington Wizards, and it was a very rough start to the year as Washington had a terrible record and Westbrook was dealing with multiple injuries. But around the midpoint of the year after the All-Star break, Westbrook finally got healthy and Washington started rolling. And looking at the last 23 games of the year, Westbrook averaged 23 points per game, 14.0 assists, 13.5 boards on 45, 33, and 74 splits, had 19 triple-doubles, and Washington had a 17-6 record. And during that stretch, they were actually good enough to make it in the play-in tournament. And after beating the Pacers, they would actually make the playoffs. And once again for Westbrook, it was a pretty disappointing playoff run, as he only averaged 19 points per game, 11.8 assists, 10.4 boards on 33, 25, and 79 splits, with 4.2 turnovers. And Washington lost in 5 to the Philadelphia 76ers. Now in defense of Westbrook in this series, he was banged up. I think he was still dealing with injuries, but for any superstar player, this is not a good playoff series for Westbrook, and definitely one of the worst ones of his career. And when looking at Westbrook's first year with the Wizards, it was sandwiched by injuries, but there was that 23-game stretch where he played out of his mind. And using common sense, Westbrook is still an elite point guard, but I think the guys ahead of him had better years in 2021, and they're also established players when it comes to the playoffs. So that's why I put Westbrook at the number 6 spot. Now finally getting the top 5 at number 5, we have Kyrie Irving. One of the most unique players in NBA history, whose offensive talent rivals the all-time greats. And this year for Kyrie was coming off 2020, where he only played 20 games. And just like that year, it was a crazy filled year with injuries, coaching changes, and the roster overhaul was definitely immense. And through all of that controversy, Kyrie Irving still played great this year, averaging 26.9 points per game, 6.0 assists, 4.8 boards on insane 51, 40, and 92 splits, the 5th highest scoring average for a 50-40-90 season. And Kyrie this year was absolutely phenomenal. Even if he was hurt, he still played great when he was on the court. I think the argument for Kyrie being higher, that skill-wise, you could argue he's a top 5 skill player in NBA history, and easily the most skilled point guard in the NBA today. Now looking at Kyrie in the first round of the playoffs versus Boston, his former team, he had a big-time Game 4, we had 39 points, and it's pretty much an easy series as Brooklyn won in 5. Now unfortunately in the second round versus Milwaukee in Game 4, Kyrie would go out with an ankle injury that would cause him to miss the next 3 games. And throughout Kyrie's career, injuries have been a major problem, and this year was no different. But still overall looking at his playoff stats, he averaged 24.1 points per game, 5.9 boards, 3.6 assists on 47, 36, and 93 splits. and when Kyrie played versus the Bucks, they were up 2-1, and when he played in the playoffs, they had a 6-2 record. And I think if he was healthy, Brooklyn would have made the NBA Finals and possibly won it. But unfortunately, Kyrie was not, and Brooklyn was beat in the second round. So taking all that into account, Kyrie, I think, is the 5th best point guard in the NBA, and you could argue he's 4th or even 3rd. Now at number 4, we have the oldest player on this list, that being Chris Paul, who right now is in his first year with the Phoenix Suns. And the point guard, once again, has revived a dead franchise, as the Suns made the playoffs in the Western Conference Finals for the first time in over a decade. And look at this Suns team with Chris Paul, they went 51-21 this year, and the 2nd best record in the Western Conference, and because of that, he finished 5th in MVP voting. Now, very similar to Kyrie Irving, Chris Paul throughout his career has had trouble with major injuries when it comes to the playoffs. And Game 1 versus the Lakers, he would go down with a shoulder injury that would hamper him for the first 4 games of that series. In those games, he averaged 9.2 points per game, 7.7 assists, 3.5 boards on 39, 20, and 75 splits. Definitely not top 5 point guard numbers or even Chris Paul numbers. But after that brief injury, once he got healthy, he averaged 25.5 points per game, 10.3 assists, 5.0 boards on 63, 75, and 100 splits. So when Chris Paul is healthy in the playoffs, he is still elite and his impact rivals anyone in the NBA. And I think him playing great in the playoffs, as well as reviving the Suns team, that makes him the 4th best point guard in the NBA, even at 36 years old. Now getting the top 3 and look at the top tier point guards, we have Damian Lillard. And Dame this year, for the 8th straight season, made the playoffs for the Portland Trail Blazers. And Dame, as you guys know, is not afraid of the big time moments or taking the big time shots. And this year in the NBA, he was the leader in clutch time scoring at 4.8 points per game on 51, 39, and 95 splits, with a plus minus of plus 2.9, which is 3rd among qualified starters. So obviously Dame is great in the clutch, and this year Portland was the 6th best team in the Western Conference, and he finished 7th in MVP voting. And for a player of Dame's caliber, what really matters is how you play in the playoffs. And this year Dame in the playoffs averaged 34.3 points per game, 10.2 assists, 4.3 boards, had 35 threes, and 47 made free throws. And if you rank those stats to how he's played in his career, they rank 1st, 3rd, 1st, and 1st. Individually, the best playoff series Dame's ever played in his entire career. And in Game 5 versus Denver, he had 55 points, 10 assists, 12 threes on 70% shooting, and numerous big-time clutch shots. And actually for this game, Dame Lillard had a game score of 55.9, the highest in playoff history. And even with Portland losing that game and losing this series, I think Dame in this series showed an uncanny ability to carry his team, even if they didn't win. He had some all-time great games in this series, scoring 55 points, 42, 37, and 34. And he basically did anything he could to will this team to a first-round victory. And when looking at the elite point guards in the NBA, you look for big-time playoff performers, and Dame right now is definitely one of those. That's why I ranked him as the 3rd best point guard in the NBA, and you could argue he's actually the 2nd. But the player I chose for the number 2 spot is Luka Doncic, one of the best young players in the NBA, and the player I believe will be the best player of the 2020s. And looking at Luka this year, he was coming from a breakout 2020 season where he averaged 28 points per game. And this year, once again, he put up big time stats, but the big difference is that Dallas this year had a 42-30 record, good enough for the 5th seed in the Western Conference. And looking at how he played in the playoffs in the first round versus the LA Clippers, he averaged a ridiculous 35.7 points per game, the 14th highest in the series ever, 10.3 assists, 7.9 boards on 49, 40, and 53 splits. An absolutely dominant series from Luka, playing against Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, as well as Patrick Beverley. And looking at game by game in this series, Luka had 3 games of 40 plus points, 4 games of 10 plus assists, and 5 games of 5 plus made threes. And in game 7, he would show up in a big time way in LA, having 46 points, 14 assists, 7 boards on 57% shooting. And unfortunately, Dallas would lose his heartbreaking game 7 to the LA Clippers. But still, as an individual basketball player, Luka in this series did everything he could, scoring the 3rd most points in a game 7 and having the 14th highest scoring average in a playoff series ever. And Luka right now, as a 22-year-old, is essentially a walking triple-double when it comes to the playoffs. and I think in time, hopefully the Mavericks get the right pieces around him, and they are competing for championships in the near future. And right now, I have him at the number 2 spot. Now with the number 1 spot, this should not be a surprise, we have the man, the myth, the legend, Steph Curry. And Steph this season was coming off a year in 2020 where he only played 5 games. And 2021 was kind of the revenge year for Steph Curry, as in this season he went off, averaging 32 points per game, a career high, which also led the NBA, 5.8 assists, 5.5 boards on 48, 42, and 92 splits, and he made an NBA high 337 threes. And in my personal opinion, Steph Curry is a 32-year-old. This is the best individual version of Steph Curry, even better than 2016 unanimous MVP Curry. The way he dominated this year for the Warriors team with a bad supporting cast was exciting every single night, and he really did carry the NBA for a very boring regular season. And when Steph played for this Warriors team, they had a 37-26 record, which is on pace to be the 5th seed in the Western Conference. And scoring-wise, Steph this year had 8 40-point games, 2 50-point games, and 1 60-point game. And in those games, the Warriors had an impressive 9-2 record. And very similar to Westbrook, Steph Curry, near the end of the year, when his teammate needed to step up, he did that in a big way. And over the last 23 games, Steph averaged 37.1 points per game, 5.7 boards, 5.0 assists on 49, 44, and 90 splits. And he had 10 straight 30-point games, 7 40-point games, and 1 50-point game. Now the sad part for Steph this year is that Golden State would not make the playoffs. But even with that being the case, Steph Curry in my eyes is really the best point guard in the NBA. I think that title for him is going to be held on for the next 2 or even 3 years. So that right there is the list of my top 10 point guards currently in the NBA. And if you guys know me, I hate making top 10 lists. I much prefer doing tier ranking systems, as that way of ranking players is more accurate and gives a better visual representation of how close these players are. And if I had to do that in tier 1, I would have Steph Curry, Luka, and Dame in that order. Tier 2, CP3, Kyrie, Westbrook, and Trae in that order. In tier 3, De'Aaron Fox, Jrue Holiday, and John Morant. But that right there is my list. Narrowing it down to 10 was very difficult. The point guard position is the deepest position in the NBA, and it has the most overall talent from top to bottom. So with that being said, let me know your guys' thoughts on this list. Do you like my ranking systems? Do you agree with it? Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments below. And as always, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you guys next time.